Some dogs bark for attention, others bark out of fear. But the bark that shattered the silence in Timberline Pass wasn't either. It was a warning, one that came from deep inside the chest of a dying canine who refused to give up, not even when the world had. 10-year-old Lucas Reynolds wasn't supposed to be out in the woods that day. He should have been at home finishing homework, warming his hands by the wood stove. But that was the thing about Lucas, he never quite fit into the places he was supposed to be. And thank God for that. Because if Lucas had followed the rules, if he'd taken the bus, if he'd gone straight home and ignored the snow-covered trail curling behind the ranger station, then no one would have found the dog. And that meant no one would have found her. But all of that, the gunshots, the broken device, the secret buried beneath the pine trees, was still ahead of him. Right now, all he saw was a dark lump in the snow. He squinted through the curtain of wind, blinking hard. The sky had turned the color of wet ash. Snowflakes the size of quarters were coming down in waves, soaking through his jacket and socks. His flashlight, barely bigger than a candy bar, cast a shaky beam of yellow light over the trail. And then, the lump moved. Not much, just a twitch. Lucas froze. A branch, no. It was alive. His heart kicked in his chest as he took a cautious step forward. And another. There in the middle of the path lay a German Shepherd. Big, still, bleeding. Lucas's throat tightened. He should have run, should have gone back for help. But something about the dog's eyes stopped him cold. They weren't panicked. They weren't pleading. They were just watching. Lucas crouched down slowly, ignoring the sting of ice against his knees. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You okay?" The dog didn't move, but its ear twitched a small, deliberate flick. Lucas slipped off his coat, a thick, oversized hand-me-down from his cousin in Idaho, and draped it carefully over the dog's body. He had no idea what he was doing, but it felt right. A frayed strap poked through the shepherd's matted fur, thick military-style nylon. And there, nearly worn away, were 3-stitched letters. K9. Lucas's breath caught. "You're not just any dog," he murmured. "You were someone's partner." The dog didn't blink. It just breathed shallow, ragged, and never took its eyes off him. Lucas looked around. No houses nearby, no cell signal, no one coming. Just him and a broken dog in a snowstorm that wouldn't quit. He didn't think, he just moved. There was an old ranger shed just off the path, half buried in snow, its roof sagging under the weight of years. Lucas dragged the dog inch by inch through the slush and into the shelter. Inside, the air was barely warmer, but at least the wind couldn't reach them. He sat down next to the dog, their shoulders touching. And for a long time, they didn't move. Just two creatures, one young, one wounded, holding onto each other in a wooden box no one remembered. From his backpack, Lucas pulled out the few things he had: a melted chocolate bar, a comic book, a flashlight, and a tiny roll of gauze left over from a summer bike crash. He tore the wrapper open and tried to bandage the wound on the dog's hind leg. It was clumsy, soaked through almost immediately, but it stayed. "You need a name," Lucas whispered. "Can't just call you Dog." He looked into those amber eyes again, still watching, still silent. "Shadow," he said quietly. "That fits. No bark, no tail wag, just breathing." But something shifted in the room. A warmth, a stillness, as if the dog had accepted the name and the boy. If stories like this matter to you, where animals become heroes in the most unexpected ways, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals. Because these stories aren't just fiction, they're hope. Lucas dozed for a while, his head resting lightly on the dog's side. He dreamt of pine trees and wind of eyes that never blinked. When he woke, the snow was still falling. The shed creaked with each gust, and Shadow was still there, still alive. Lucas reached into his coat pocket, checking his flashlight. It flickered once, then held. He turned to check on Shadow and noticed something odd tucked beneath the coat, half hidden under the dog's chest, was something square. He gently slid it out. A black plastic device, small, scuffed. Not quite a phone, not quite a radio. It looked like a military pager with a broken screen, a torn strap, and 3 faded letters scratched into the side. E-Ni-Eat. Lucas stared at it. The red light blinked once, then died. "What is this?" he whispered. Shadow didn't move, but Lucas knew the dog had been guarding it, protecting it, curling his whole body around it. It wasn't junk, it was a message. Lucas zipped the device into the inside pocket of his coat and sat in the quiet, eyes wide open now. The wind outside was dying down, but his heart had just started pounding. Whatever this thing was, it mattered, and someone had wanted it not to be found. The next morning, Lucas helped Shadow to his feet. The dog limped, but he stood, and then without prompting, he walked to the shed's door. Lucas blinked. You want to go? The shepherd took one step outside, then another. But he didn't run. He led. Lucas grabbed his backpack, zipped his coat, and followed. The trail they took wasn't the one Lucas knew. It wasn't the logging road or the marked hiking path. It was deeper, wilder, like a memory the forest had tried to forget. Shadow moved with purpose, stopping every few feet to sniff the air, ears perked, eyes sharp despite the pain. Lucas stumbled after him, sock-soaked breath fogging up like smoke. Where were you? Are you taking me? An hour passed, maybe two. And then the ridge. It rose just above a frozen stream, narrow and twisted. At the base of a crooked pine tree, Shadow stopped. He sniffed once, then began to dig. Lucas dropped to his knees beside him, brushing away snow with his gloves. And that's when he saw it. A metal plate, half buried, rusted, bolted into the ground. There was a symbol faded. Government issue Ranger Service, he couldn't tell. But there was also a handle. Lucas's heart thudded in his chest. He fumbled with the latch. It didn't move. He looked at Shadow. Is this it? Is this where you came from? The dog stared at him, quiet, still. Lucas reached for the device again, turned it over in his hand, EC. He stood slowly, the snow swirling around him. Somewhere beneath his boots was a secret, a truth frozen under ice and time, and a K9 who wouldn't let it stay buried. Lucas didn't sleep that night. Not really. He sat curled against the wall of the old ranger shed, listening to the wind hiss through cracks in the boards. The air smelled like pine and old wood, and the coppery tang of blood. Shadow lay next to him, breathing slow and shallow, one ear flicking every now and then, as if chasing dreams or nightmares. Lucas kept thinking about that metal plate in the woods, about the device with the letters EC scratched into the side, and about the fact that nobody else knew it was out there. No one but him. By sunrise, he'd already made up his mind. He packed what little he had, half a peanut butter sandwich, his comic book, in case he needed paper, and the little flashlight that was holding on for dear life. He wrapped it all in his coat and zipped it into his backpack. Then quietly he knelt by Shadow. You coming? He whispered. The dog didn't lift his head. For a second, Lucas's heart dropped. But then Shadow's eyes opened slow and steady, and he gave a single heavy exhale as if to say, You're not doing this without me, kid. Lucas smiled. Outside, the morning was quiet. The storm had pulled back like a curtain, leaving a world crusted in ice. Branches bent under the weight of frozen snow. Everything looked cleaner, somehow colder, but clearer. Like the forest had been holding its breath all night. They moved slow. Lucas let Shadow set the pace. Every few feet, the dog stopped to sniff, ears twitching. It wasn't the same trail as the day before. This one looped around the frozen stream and wound through a thicket of black spruce, the trunks dark and narrow like soldiers standing guard. After about an hour, they reached the clearing again. Lucas recognized the crooked pine, the ridge, the wind-scoured snow. And there it was, the metal hatch. Only now in the early light, he could see more shallow paw prints circling the plate, scratch marks near the edges. Shadow had been here before, probably more than once. Lucas dropped to his knees and cleared the snow from the handle. He tried pulling again, still stuck. Shadow stood beside him, tail still, body tense. And then quietly he gave a soft whimper, like he wanted Lucas to try harder. Lucas grabbed a rock from the edge of the clearing, wedged it under the handle, then pressed down with both hands, his boots slipping in the snow. The metal groaned, rust cracked, then clung. The hatch shifted and a breath of air rose up from below. It was damp, cold, metallic. Lucas leaned over the edge, flashlight pointed downward. A ladder descended into darkness, old steel rungs bolted to the concrete. Seriously, he muttered. Shadow stepped to the edge, looked down, then back at Lucas. Lucas took a shaky breath. You want me to go down there, don't you? Shadow didn't bark, just waited. Lucas set one foot on the top rung. It creaked under his weight. He looked back once at the sky, gray and empty, then climbed. The ladder led down maybe 10 feet, ending in a narrow cement tunnel. His flashlight beam bounced off walls lined with rust stains and old mildew. The place smelled like wet rocks and something else, something sharp and sour like fear, soaked into concrete. At the end of the tunnel was a small room. Lucas stepped inside, his sneakers echoing faintly. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a broken cot, some shelves, and a rusted bucket in the corner. Scratches lined the wall near a metal ring bolted to the floor. And in the corner, a boot. One boot. Lucas's flashlight shook slightly. Then he heard it. A sound, so faint he thought it was the wind. Oh, Liston, help. He froze. His breath caught. He scanned the room with the flashlight hard hammering. "Hello," he whispered. Silence. Then again. "Please." It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. Lucas dropped to his knees and swept the light toward the floor. There near the back wall was a narrow vent just wide enough for sound to carry through. He leaned closer. "Hello, can you hear me?" A pause, then a hoarse whisper. "Jack." Lucas blinked. "I am not Jack. My name's Lucas. But I found your dog." A long silence. Then a sound between a sob and a laugh. "You found him?" "Yeah, he's hurt, but he's alive. He led me here." The voice broke. "I thought he was dead. I thought they killed him." Lucas swallowed hard. Who did this to you?" A pause. "I don't know their names. Just faces, voices, the kind that don't want you to be found." Lucas felt a chill run down his back. "How long have you been down here?" "I lost count." What's your name?" A long breath. Emily Carter." Lucas's heart stopped. He pulled the black device from his jacket, the one marked EC. He turned it over in his hands. "I have something that belongs to you," he whispered. "A tracker, a transmitter." "It was all I had left," she said. "I kept it hidden. I didn't know if it was still working." Lucas looked back toward the ladder. "I need to go get help. I'll bring someone, I promise." "Please, hurry." Lucas climbed out fast, his legs shaky. At the top, Shadow was waiting, eyes locked on the boy's face. "She's down there," Lucas said breathlessly. "She's alive." Shadow pressed his head into the boy's chest. Lucas didn't hesitate. He took off running. Across the ridge, down the trail, back through the trees and toward town. The sheriff's office sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth. It looked like a log cabin someone had tried to turn into a government building, complete with a flickering open sign in the window and a moose antler rack above the door. Lucas pushed through the door like a fireball. Deputy Rachel Deeks looked up from behind the desk granola bar halfway to her mouth. "Lucas," she blinked. "You okay?" He dropped the device on the counter. "I found her. Emily Carter. She's underground. She's alive." Rachel stared. "What are you talking about?" Lucas launched into it, how he found Shadow, the hatch, the voice, the vent, the name. He didn't stop to breathe until he was gasping. Rachel lifted the device slowly. "Emily Carter went missing last year, FBI case. They thought she was dead. She's not." "Lucas, I'm not making this up. Please just listen. There's a hatch out in Timberline Pass. It's real. I went down. I talked to her." Rachel hesitated. "I'll file a report." "No, not a report. A rescue." She exchanged a glance with Chief Breen, who had stepped into the room, arms crossed. "We don't do rescues in the middle of snowstorms based on the word of a child," the chief said calmly. Lucas's voice cracked. "If you wait till morning, she might be dead." Chief Breen raised a brow. "And you're sure this isn't just some story you read in a comic book?" Lucas clenched his fists. "Then, I'm turning in." Shadow limped into the room. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just walked forward, bloody and stiff, and looked them both in the eye. Rachel stared. "That dog's trained." "He is," Lucas said. He waited, in the snow, for her. Silence. Then Breen turned. "That's enough. We'll send a ranger in the morning." Lucas's heart sank. No one believed him. He turned and walked out without another word. Outside, the snow had started again, thicker this time, blowing sideways. The streetlights were fuzzy halos, and deep in his chest, something started to burn. They wouldn't help, but he would. Shadow waited by the tree line. Lucas zipped up his coat, tightened his boots, and whispered, "Let's go." The woods looked different at night. Not empty, just watching. Lucas moved slowly, boots crunching in the thin crust of fresh snow, the beam of his flashlight bouncing between tree trunks like a nervous eye. Beside him, Shadow walked with a limp, his head low, his breath fogging the cold air in short bursts. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Lucas knew exactly where they were going, and Shadow had always known. They reached the old clearing just before midnight. The hatch was still open like a mouth in the ground, frozen mid-scream. Snow had dusted the metal edges, and Lucas brushed it away before dropping to one knee. "Emily," he called softly into the dark. "It's me, Lucas." For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, "Mate Renhars, Lucas." Lucas sagged in relief. Her voice was weaker now, barely more than a thread. But she was still there, still alive. "I brought help," he said quickly. "I mean, not real help, not yet. But I brought me and Shadow. We're here. We're not going anywhere." A beat of silence. Then just barely "thank you." Lucas looked over at Shadow, who had dropped beside him, front paws stretched forward, tail still. He was alert but not tense, waiting. Something about the stillness made Lucas uneasy. The air felt wrong, heavy, then Shadow stiffened. His ears lifted, nose high. A low growl vibrated in his throat. Lucas froze. What is it? The dog stood slowly, sniffing the air, and turned toward the edge of the clearing. His eyes narrowed on something in the dark. Lucas followed his gaze and saw it. Between two tree trunks just beyond the clearing, something moved. Not much, just a flicker. A disturbance in the pattern of shadows. Then, a flash. Metal. Lucas squinted. It wasn't a weapon, not yet. It was something else. A lens. A camera. Someone's watching us, he whispered. And then, Churinya. Crack. A gunshot shattered the night. Bark exploded from a tree inches from Lucas's head. Shadow lunged, slamming his weight into the boy and knocking him sideways into the snow. Run, Lucas gasped. They scrambled to their feet and bolted, diving into the trees just as a second shot echoed behind them. Lucas ducked low, dodging branches' legs, burning lungs seizing. He couldn't see who was shooting. The woods were too thick, the snow too bright under the moonlight. Then a third shot, and this time a sound that froze him in place. Shadow yelped. It wasn't loud, but it was raw and real. Lucas turned, slipping and falling in the snow. Shadow had stumbled to his side, one front leg, shaking blood dark against his fur. No, no, no. Lucas dropped beside him, pulling off his scarf with numb fingers and pressing it to the wound. You're okay. You're okay. He glanced back toward the clearing. No one was following them. Whoever fired had stopped. 3 warning shots, or maybe not warnings at all. Lucas dragged Shadow behind a fallen log and crouched low. The forest was silent again, but it was the wrong kind of silent. It was the silence that came after a threat, when you don't know if it's really gone or just waiting to finish the job. Shadow whimpered once, his body twitching under Lucas's grip. The boy clenched his jaw. Stay with me, he whispered. The adrenaline that had kept him upright began to fade, and all that was left was cold and fury. Someone had shot at them. Someone knew Emily was still alive, and they were willing to kill to keep her underground. Lucas pulled off his gloves and pressed both hands into Shadow's side, willing the bleeding to stop. I'm not letting you die out here, he muttered. You hear me, not you. They stayed like that for what felt like hours. Lucas's knees went numb. His shoulders ached from holding pressure, but he didn't move. He wouldn't. By the time the moon slipped behind the clouds and the wind picked up again, he'd made a decision. He had to tell someone who would listen. He thought about going back to the sheriff's office, but they'd already ignored him twice. He wasn't wasting another breath on Chief Breen. He needed someone with reach, someone with a camera. By dawn, Lucas was sprinting through town. His boots were soaked. His face was pale. Blood had dried on his scarf and sleeves. He didn't care. He made it to the Channel 8 news station just as the first reporter arrived. A man in his 30s stood by the van sipping coffee and flipping through a notebook. Lucas crashed into the scene like a thunderclap. I need help, he yelled. I found a woman. She's alive, please. The man turned sharply, nearly dropping his cup. Whoa, kid, slow down. Are you hurt? No, but someone else is. Her name is Emily Carter. She's underground in a bunker or something, near Timberline Pass. I talked to her. She's real. The reporter blinked. Emily Carter. That was a missing person case last year, right? Federal investigation. Lucas nodded rapidly. Yes, I found her dog too. He's a K9. He's been trying to lead people to her this whole time. Another voice called from behind them. Did you say K9? A woman in a red puffer vest stepped forward, pressed badge clipped to her collar. She studied Lucas for a moment, eyes sharp. You're the kid the sheriff's department keeps waving off, aren't you? Lucas exhaled, nearly shaking. Yes, and I don't care if you believe me, just come. Bring a camera, I'll show you everything. The woman turned to the cameraman. Grab your gear. An hour later, Lucas stood in the snow, the camera rolling as he pointed toward the hatch. Shadow lay beside him, bandaged as best as Lucas could manage, eyes open but tired. My name is Lucas Reynolds, he said. I'm 10 years old. I found this dog 3 days ago. He was lying in the snow guarding something. I followed him and he led me here. And I heard her, Emily Carter. I heard her voice. She's alive. The footage was raw, his voice shook, but it was real. Within 20 minutes, it was on the station's emergency feed. Within 2 hours, it was viral. And within 3, it reached the desk of a federal agent tracking dormant missing persons cases. By 3:17 p.m., a gray DHS helicopter landed near Timberline Pass. Lucas watched as 3 agents stepped out. 2 medics, 1 investigator, all armed, all focused. Shadow was lifted onto a stretcher, still conscious, still fighting. He didn't bark. He just watched Lucas like always. And when the agents dropped into the hatch, Lucas gripped the edge of his coat so tightly his knuckles went white. Then radio static. "We've got her." Lucas didn't realize he was crying until Rachel Deeks, who had shown up late and wide-eyed, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have listened." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because someone had listened. And now the world would too. Emily Carter was alive. That alone would have made headlines. But it wasn't just her survival that shocked the country, it was what she knew. 2 days after her rescue, she lay in a hospital bed in Billings, Montana, hooked up to IVs, her skin pale and bruised, her voice rough from dehydration. But when the federal agents stepped into her room with notebooks and recorders, she didn't hesitate. She told them everything. How she'd been working as an undercover analyst on a joint operation between the Bureau and Homeland Security. How she'd stumbled across a backdoor network of money transfers and black sites tied to classified operations that didn't exist on paper. And how the moment she filed a formal report, she was sent into the field on what she thought was a standard site sweep. Instead, she was met by men in plain clothes with no badges, only weapons. They dragged her from the truck, beat her, took her badge and credentials, and buried her in a hole beneath the woods. She'd been down there for over a year, long enough to lose count of seasons, long enough to give up hope until she heard a child's voice through the vent, a boy named Lucas, and the dog who never stopped looking for her. But the agents weren't ready for what she said next. When they asked who signed off on the operation that led to her disappearance, Emily looked them in the eye and gave a name: Warren Reynolds. The room fell dead silent. The deputy director of Homeland Security, the lead agent, asked, stunned. Emily nodded. That's who orchestrated the whole thing. He was at the top of it, and no one wanted to question him. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just sat there surrounded by wires and machines and burned down a man's entire empire with one sentence. The name hit the media within hours. And for the second time that week, Lucas Reynolds watched the news change in real time. Lucas sat on a chair in the corner of the veterinary trauma clinic, still wearing the same hoodie he'd had on the day they found Emily. His cheeks were flushed from sleep, and his hands were buried in the pocket of his coat. Beside him, Shadow lay on a thick padded mat, wrapped in bandages and hooked to a slow IV drip. His breathing was steadier now, deeper. The vet tech had told Lucas it was a miracle the dog hadn't bled out in the woods. "I think he stayed alive out of sheer will," she'd said, watching the monitor blink. Like he had something to finish. Lucas didn't respond. He just sat there with one hand resting on Shadow's paw, letting the rise and fall of the dog's breath settle his thoughts. The door creaked open behind him. Lucas didn't turn around until he heard the voice. "Hey, kid." Emily stood in the doorway, pale but upright, a cane in one hand. Her hair had been washed, her hospital gown replaced with jeans and a borrowed flannel. She looked like someone who'd been through war and won. Lucas stood immediately. "Emily, you're okay." She smiled, tired but real. "Thanks to you." Lucas looked down at Shadow. Him too. Emily crossed the room slowly and knelt beside the dog. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the fur between his ears. Shadow blinked, then leaned into her touch. "I thought he was dead," she whispered. "I thought they'd taken everything." "You still had him," Lucas said softly. "Even when you didn't know it." Emily looked at the boy. "And you could have walked away." "I almost did," he admitted. "But something about him just felt like a secret I couldn't ignore." She smiled again. "That's why you found me. You listened, when no one else would." Lucas glanced at the TV in the corner of the clinic. It was on mute, but the headline said enough. Deputy Director Reynolds accused in missing agent case. Secret sites, secret orders, and a kid who blew it wide open. Lucas clenched his jaw. "He's my stepdad." Emily's smile faded. "I didn't know it was him until you said his name," Lucas added. "But I always knew something wasn't right." Emily studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thick with understanding. Two people connected by the same enemy, by the same dog, and by the same storm. By the end of the week, Warren Reynolds had been placed on administrative leave. 2 agents were arrested. 3 others disappeared. And every reporter in the country wanted a piece of the kid from Pine Bridge, Montana. But Lucas didn't care about cameras. He didn't care about politics or press conferences or trending hashtags. He cared about one thing: making sure Shadow didn't die. So he stayed at the vet clinic every night, sleeping in the chair, tucking his coat over himself when it got cold. Volunteers brought him food. Local businesses dropped off blankets. Even the sheriff's department, finally humbled, sent flowers and an apology letter. But Lucas didn't want gifts. He wanted justice and healing. and a world where kids with instincts were taken seriously the first time. Emily went on record within 10 days. She testified in front of a closed federal panel, then gave a statement to the media from the steps of the courthouse. Her voice was stronger now, her gaze sharper. "I was buried beneath the ground for 13 months," she said into the microphones. "I survived because I refused to forget who I was. But I was rescued because a boy who owed me nothing chose to listen when no one else did. And a dog who should have given up never stopped believing I was out there." The video of her speech went viral. Some people called her a hero, but she corrected them. The real hero is 10 years old, and he carried a flashlight and a broken transmitter through a snowstorm just to find someone he didn't know. Lucas watched that part from the vet's waiting room. He didn't say anything, but Shadow thumped his tail once, as if he agreed. By spring, Pine Bridge thawed. The rivers swelled with meltwater. Trees began to bud, and in the field behind the fire station, something new appeared. A long, low building made of cedar and steel with a painted sign above the doors that read, "The Carter Reynolds Rescue Center," not named for the man who tried to erase them, but for the two who refused to stay erased. The building had two wings, one for canines and service dogs in recovery, those hurt in the line of duty or abandoned after retirement, and one for kids, specifically for children who had lived through more than they should have. Kids like Lucas. Inside the front entrance, under a glass case, sat the torn canine harness labeled Shadow and the old flashlight duct-taped and cracked at the base. Beside them, a brass plaque, "For the ones who stayed when no one else would." Emily found Lucas sitting under a tree behind the center the day before the grand opening. He was tossing a pine cone into the grass, and Shadow was nudging it back with his nose tail wagging gently. Emily sat beside him. "You know, they're talking about giving you a medal," she said. Lucas shrugged. "I don't want a medal." "What do you want?" Lucas thought for a second. "A normal life, I guess." Emily smiled. "You might have missed your shot, kid." Lucas smiled too. "I think I want to be a K9 handler one day," he said. "Real one. Official." Emily nodded. "I think you already are." They watched the sun dip behind the trees, casting long golden rays over the grass. Shadow lay beside them, eyes half closed, finally at peace. And in that moment, everything felt still, like the world had stopped running from the truth, like it had finally started listening. 6 weeks after Emily Carter was pulled from the ground, the entire nation turned its eyes to a courtroom in Washington, D.C. They called it the Reynolds Inquiry. But for Lucas, it wasn't politics. It was personal. He sat on a wooden bench just outside the federal courthouse, the morning air warm with the scent of spring. He wore clean jeans, a too-big blazer someone had loaned him, and sneakers that still had a little pine sap on the soles. Shadow lay at his feet, bandaged leg, nearly healed fur glossy. Again, eyes calm and steady. The dog hadn't left his side once. Inside, a man he used to call Dad was on trial for conspiracy obstruction and attempted murder. Lucas tugged on the collar of his shirt. He hated the tie. "Ready?" Emily asked, stepping out from the building. She was in a slate gray suit, hair pinned back, looking 10 feet tall, even though she still walked with a cane. She glanced at the boy beside her and gave a soft smile. "You don't have to be perfect," she said. "Just honest." Lucas nodded. "I can do that." She reached down and scratched behind Shadow's ear. "You too, soldier." The dog gave a little huff. "Ready." The courtroom was full, not just with officials and lawyers, but reporters, civilians, and government agents who had once answered to Warren Reynolds. At the front of the room, the man himself sat in a crisp suit, his hair slicked back, his face unreadable. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed, as if all of this, the cameras, the accusations, the testimonies, were an inconvenience. Lucas hadn't seen him since before the snowstorm. Back then, Warren had been the man who barked at him for leaving dishes in the sink, who slammed doors when he thought no one was watching, who told Lucas he'd never be more than a soft, useless kid. Now that man was in chains. The judge called Lucas to the stand. He walked slowly to the front, nerves prickling like static in his chest. Shadow waited beside the bench, calm as ever. "Please state your name," the prosecutor asked. "Lucas Reynolds." The room went still. "Are you related to the defendant?" Lucas swallowed. "He's my stepdad." There it was, the headline moment. The boy who brought down the man who shared his last name. The next 30 minutes moved like molasses. Lucas explained everything: how he missed the bus, found the dog, discovered the hatch, heard Emily's voice, how he begged the sheriff's department for help, and how they ignored him. He told the court about the gunshots, the camera in the trees, the blood on Shadow's fur. And when the prosecutor asked why he didn't give up, why he went back into the woods even after being shot at, Lucas said it as clearly as he could. Because she was still down there, and no one else cared. His voice didn't shake. He didn't cry. But when he looked out at Warren Reynolds sitting so still behind the defense table, something inside him broke loose. This was the man who had made him feel small his whole life. And now Lucas had exposed him for who he really was. A man who buried the truth because he thought no one would ever dig it up. Emily testified next. She didn't hesitate, didn't stammer. She described the black site, the orders, the false mission briefing that led her into the woods. She detailed how she'd been beaten, gagged, and locked away. How Shadow had fought his way out and disappeared into the forest wounded but free. How Warren Reynolds had called her a threat to national security. Was there any due process, the prosecutor asked. None. Was there a warrant? No. Then who gave the order to neutralize you? Emily stared at Warren as she answered. He did. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Warren didn't flinch. But Lucas saw it, that tiny twitch near the corner of his mouth. Cracks forming. After that day, the courtroom shifted. More witnesses came forward. More evidence surfaced, hidden files, sealed communications payment records from off-book accounts. One by one, agents who had been loyal to Warren started flipping, afraid of going down with him. And while the media went wild with headlines like, "The Child Who Broke the Silence" and "K9 Saves Agent from the Grave," Lucas kept going to the clinic with Shadow. He read to him sometimes. Other times, they just sat in silence. "Does it ever stop feeling heavy?" he asked Emily one night after court. She took a long sip of her coffee and said no. "But it starts to feel worth it." Warren Reynolds never confessed, but he didn't need to. The evidence did it for him. On the final day of the trial, the judge delivered a full conviction. Conspiracy, abuse of power, attempted murder. Maximum sentence. No parole. Lucas didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just sat there holding Shadow's leash as the man who'd once told him he was nothing was led away in cuffs. Like he wasn't carrying anyone else's silence anymore. Podcasts, book deals, a movie. Lucas said no to all of it. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted to build something that lasted. So when the town of Pine Bridge offered to name the new rescue center after him, and Emily, he said yes, but only if they added Shadow too. Because without the dog, none of it would have happened. Not the discovery, not the rescue, not the justice. On a sunny afternoon that summer, the grand opening drew people from all over the state. Reporters, rescuers, families of other missing persons who'd never gotten closure. Lucas stood under the cedar awning of the building, wearing a new button-up shirt and a pair of jeans that finally fit. Emily spoke first, her voice strong over the mic. "Justice is not just a courtroom decision," she said. "It's a choice, a voice, a flashlight in the hands of a boy who refused to walk away." Then she introduced Lucas. He stepped up to the podium, Shadow sitting proudly beside him. "I don't think I'm a hero," Lucas began. "I think I just saw something that didn't feel right, and I didn't pretend it wasn't there." He looked at the crowd, some smiling, some crying, some just listening. "I think a lot of kids get ignored. We say something's wrong and adults pat our heads and change the subject. But sometimes the people who see the truth aren't the ones in charge." He looked down at Shadow. "And sometimes the one who saves you doesn't talk at all." Applause rolled through the field. Not loud, but long and real. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the sun had started to dip behind the hills, Lucas sat on the back steps of the center with a bowl of ice cream in one hand and a pine cone in the other. Shadow nudged the pine cone with his nose. Lucas smiled. They didn't talk about the trial anymore, or the past, or even the hatch in the woods. They just sat in the warm evening air, two survivors enjoying the quiet. A quiet they'd earned. Autumn returned to Pine Bridge with golden leaves and a quiet kind of pride. The Carter Reynolds Rescue Center had been open for 5 months, and not a single day had passed without someone walking through its doors. Parents with kids in need of therapy, dogs, veterans healing with the help of retired K9s, and teenagers who'd once been lost and angry, but were now helping train the very dogs that saved them. It wasn't a big place, but it was a place where people listened, where truth mattered, where second chances had a leash, a name, and a heartbeat. Lucas Reynolds spent most afternoons there after school, not because he had to, but because it felt like home, the real kind. Shadow, now fully healed, had a bed behind the front desk, but he rarely used it. He preferred to patrol the halls like a wise old sheriff, making sure every bark-tail wag and laugh echoed safely. The first time a 5-year-old girl with selective mutism hugged him and whispered, "You're safe," Shadow had rested his head in her lap and closed his eyes. He understood broken things and how they mended. One chilly Saturday morning, Lucas arrived early. The sun was barely up, frost crusted the grass. His breath misted the air. He unlocked the center and turned on the lights, walking the halls in that peaceful silence before the world stirred. As he passed the memorial wall, he paused. There, framed in glass, hung Shadow's original harness, frayed, blood-stained, and stitched with the faded letters K9. Next to it, the broken transmitter still scratched with the initials EC. And beneath both, a photo someone had taken the day Emily Carter walked out of the forest, wrapped in a rescue blanket, one hand on Lucas's shoulder, the other resting gently on Shadow's head. Lucas stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "We really did it, didn't we?" From the next room, Shadow barked once as if to say, "Yes, we did." By mid-morning, the center buzzed with activity. A local scout troop arrived for a K9 demonstration. Volunteers helped sort donated food and supplies. And in the fenced yard, Lucas worked with a new recruit, a nervous golden retriever named Frankie, who had been rescued from an abandoned property 2 towns over. Frankie barked too much, pulled on the leash, and couldn't focus for more than 30 seconds. But Lucas never raised his voice. He just knelt down, looked Frankie in the eyes, and said, "It's okay to be scared. Just don't stay scared." Emily watched from the porch, coffee and hand smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "That kid," she said to one of the volunteers, "has more patience than most adults I know." Lucas didn't hear her, but Shadow did. The shepherd trotted over and sat beside his boy, watching the retriever settle down under Lucas's calm voice. They made a good team. That evening, long after everyone else had gone, Emily and Lucas locked up the center together. "Got big plans for the weekend?" she asked as she flipped off the porch light. Lucas shrugged, "Probably just homework." She smiled. "That's good. You deserve a boring weekend." Lucas looked at her. "Do you think it's really over?" Emily tilted her head. "The case? Yeah, the trial ended, the center's open, Warren's locked up. But I keep thinking, there's more. Like there's someone else out there who doesn't want us talking." Emily nodded slowly. "Maybe. But here's the thing, you made a lot of people start listening. Once truth comes out, it doesn't go back in the box." Lucas kicked at a pebble near his boot. "Still feels like it's hanging over us sometimes." "That's because you carry weight that wasn't yours," she said. "But you've also done something no adult managed to do in over a year." "What's that?" "Wetshurinianimwash. You found someone." Lucas looked at her, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she added, "Don't ever let someone tell you that kids can't see what's really going on." A few days later, a letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, hand-addressed in ink. Lucas opened it on the back porch of the center, while Shadow lay beside him, eyes half-lidded in the late afternoon sun. The letter was from a woman in Vermont. She'd seen the news. Her brother had gone missing 3 years earlier under suspicious circumstances after filing a whistleblower complaint. His case had been closed, labeled a voluntary disappearance. But she never believed it. Then she saw Lucas on TV, saw Shadow, read about the transmitter, and something clicked. "I don't know if my brother is still alive," she wrote, "but watching you and that dog gave me hope for the first time in years." Lucas sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. Then he folded it gently and slipped it into a shoebox he kept under his bed, already filled with letters just like it. Dozens of people from across the country. People who had lost someone, been ignored or silenced. They didn't all want rescue. Most just wanted to be heard. Lucas had become a symbol for something he never planned to represent, but he carried it with quiet strength. Because if there was one thing he learned from Shadow, it was this. Some heroes bark, others speak, and some just stay. On the 1-year anniversary of Emily's rescue, Pine Bridge held a town gathering in the community park. There were food trucks, live music, and even a bounce house for the kids. But the heart of the event was quieter, a small ceremony at sunset. Lucas stood beside Emily as the mayor read a proclamation naming October 22nd Shadow Day in honor of all service animals who never give up. The mayor handed Lucas a plaque, and for once Lucas didn't deflect. He held it with pride. And then stepping up to the microphone, he said something he hadn't said before in public. "When I found Shadow, I didn't know what he was carrying. I just knew he needed help. And I think maybe that's what saving people really is. Not knowing everything, not having a plan, just being the one who stays when everyone else walks away." He glanced down at Shadow, who sat like a statue, eyes locked on the boy's face. "And if he stayed for her, I was going to stay for him." The crowd was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then more. And soon the whole town stood in ovation, applauding not just a dog or a boy or even a rescue, but a promise. That truth matters. That loyalty lives. And that even in the darkest corners, light finds its way through, sometimes in the form of a kid with a broken flashlight and a German shepherd who refused to let go. That night, as the stars came out over the hills and the town lights dimmed, Lucas sat outside the center one last time before heading home. Shadow lay beside him, muzzle resting on the boy's boot. "You did good, partner," Lucas whispered. "You brought her back." Shadow didn't move. Just let out a slow exhale, soft and steady. Lucas leaned back, watching the sky. For once, the world didn't feel heavy. It felt like a place worth saving. And tomorrow, they'd do it again. 3 days after Shadow Day, Pinebridge went back to being Pinebridge. The food trucks rolled out. The bunting came down. Life resumed. But not for Lucas. Not really. He still walked the halls of the Carter Reynolds Rescue Center every day after school. He still trained with Shadow in the yard. He still read letters from strangers across the country who saw something in him he didn't always see in himself. But something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just about Emily anymore, or even Shadow. It was about what came next. He'd seen what happened when people were buried not just in dirt, but in silence. He'd lived it. And the more letters he opened, the more he realized Emily's case wasn't the only one. Not by a long shot. It was a Wednesday when the next thread found him. Lucas had stayed late at the center, cleaning out the supply closet behind the kennel wing. Shadow lay nearby, lazily chewing a tennis ball, tail thumping now and then. Lucas was elbow deep in a box labeled Archive when he pulled out a dusty manila folder. He nearly tossed it, but something stopped him. On the front, written in thick black marker, was a name he didn't recognize. Taylor Ward. He opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of case notes, animal intake forms, a single-page missing persons flyer, and a report from a ranger dated 2019. The report had been flagged as unrelated to the center's operations and tucked away. But Lucas noticed a detail most people would have missed. In the margins of one of the ranger's statements, someone had scribbled, "Dog found injured, refused to leave Ridge, returned to same location 3 nights in a row." Lucas blinked. He flipped back to the missing persons flyer. Taylor Ward, age 27, environmental researcher, disappeared while conducting wildlife surveys outside Helena, Montana. No confirmed sightings. Case marked cold. Lucas's eyes drifted back to the ranger note. Dog refused to leave Ridge. His heart thumped. He grabbed his phone and Googled the ridge listed in the report. Then he stared. The coordinates were within a few miles of Timberline Pass. Same forest, same elevation, same pattern. That night, Lucas brought the file home and laid it out on the floor of his bedroom. His mom peeked in, once took one look at the notes and gently said, "Just don't forget to sleep, okay?" He nodded, but he didn't sleep. He traced Taylor Ward's movements on an old map, marked the ranger's report in blue pen, highlighted the 3 separate nights the dog had returned. And in the bottom corner, he wrote 3 words. Same as Shadow. The pattern was too similar to ignore. A dog found wounded alone, trying to lead someone back to a place everyone had forgotten. Lucas didn't know what he'd find, but something in his gut told him Taylor Ward's story wasn't over. And someone or something was trying to make sure of that. The next morning, he brought the file to Emily. She sat at the front desk with her laptop open, reading grant proposals and therapy dog applications. When she saw the look on his face, she shut the lid without a word. He slid the folder toward her. She flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing. "This was just sitting in a box?" she asked. Lucas nodded, buried under paperwork no one ever read. Emily exhaled. "Of course it was." They sat in silence a long moment. Then she asked, "You want to go out there, don't you?" Lucas didn't answer right away. Then not alone. Emily gave him a look. "Lucas, I know I'm not stupid, but I also know this feels wrong. You said it yourself, once truth comes out, it doesn't go back in the box. So maybe we don't have to crack it wide open yet. Maybe we just follow the thread." Emily looked at him, at Shadow, at the map. Then she reached into the drawer, pulled out the keys to the center's utility jeep, and dropped them in his hand. "You take someone with you and check in every hour." Lucas smiled. "Deal." That weekend, Lucas, Emily, and a local park ranger named Jonah drove out toward the ridge. Shadow rode in the back seat, ears, alert nose pressed against the window like he knew. They parked at the edge of a faded service trail and started the hike just past noon. The forest felt different here. Quieter. Not in a peaceful way, but like it was holding something tight in its chest. At the ridge, Shadow stopped. Didn't bark. Didn't whine. Just stood very still. Lucas crouched beside him. "What do you smell, boy?" The dog stepped forward slowly, one paw, then another. Emily followed close behind, one hand on her holster out of habit, the other holding a flashlight. They moved through the underbrush until they reached a half-collapsed fire watch platform mostly buried under pine needles. Jonah swept his light across the ground, and there, half-exposed beneath the soil, was a strip of canvas. Lucas knelt, pulled gently. A torn backpack came loose. Inside, a cracked phone, a broken field journal, and a blood-stained bandana. Emily crouched beside him, flipping through the journal's pages. Most were water-damaged illegible, but one sentence written in all caps stood out near the back. "They know I saw the data." Lucas looked at her. "That's not a bear attack." "No," she said. "That's a cover-up." Shadow let out a low growl, not aggressive, a warning. Then the breeze changed, and somewhere behind them a branch snapped. Jonah turned hand already on his radio, but no voice answered. Static. Lucas looked around. The trees were still, too still. Emily stepped closer, her voice low. "We need to go, now." Shadow moved in tight beside them, body rigid, ears pinned forward. As they turned back toward the trail, Lucas paused. At the edge of a pine tree carved into the bark were 3 initials. T.W.R. Taylor Ward Reynolds. Emily followed his gaze and whispered, "Oh my God." Lucas stepped back, because those weren't just any initials. They were his, Warren Reynolds's. They made it back to the Jeep without incident. No gunshots, no figures in the trees, no chase. But Lucas didn't miss the feeling that followed them all the way to the highway, like a shadow not made of fur. Back at the center, Lucas didn't sleep again. He opened a new folder, started a new map, another story, another silence waiting to be broken. He didn't know who was watching, but he wasn't going to stop just because they were, because someone else was still out there. And this time, they were ready. The day after they found the canvas backpack near the collapsed Firewatch Tower, Lucas sat in Emily's office staring at a blurry photo of Taylor Ward. It was printed from an old news article. Dark hair, faint smile, a park badge clipped to his vest. Beside him stood a black and tan shepherd, young, lean eyes sharp. The caption underneath read, "Taylor Ward and Comet Wildlife Tracking Team for Region 6 U.S. Forestry Division." Lucas turned the page of the case summary. Disappeared September 9, 2019. Last seen east of Helena, Montana. Status presumed dead. Emily sipped her coffee in silence. Shadow lay under the desk, head on his paws, as if he knew exactly what they were reading. Lucas finally broke the quiet. "We were never supposed to find that backpack." Emily nodded, "And someone probably made sure of it." Lucas tapped the page. TWR on the tree. Those were Warren Reynolds' initials, or someone using them. "You think he had something to do with this one too?" Emily didn't answer right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice was flat. "I think Warren Reynolds wasn't working alone, and we're only scratching the surface." Lucas leaned back. "Then we need to go deeper." She gave him a long look. "You're 15, Lucas. I know. And this isn't a scavenger hunt anymore. I know that too." Emily sighed. "Then you'd better be careful." They started with the dog, Comet. There were no official records beyond a single mention in Taylor's early wildlife surveys. No adoption certificate, no microchip registration, just a single line in the ranger's logbook from 2018. Handler Ward, K9 Comet, qualified for wildlife hazard detection. Emily reached out to a contact at Fish and Wildlife, who confirmed Comet was never assigned to another ranger. Never recovered. No body, no transfer. Just gone, like his partner. "Dogs don't disappear," Emily said, "not without a reason." Lucas glanced at Shadow, who had trotted over from the front of the center and was now watching him, ears perked. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lucas asked. Emily smirked. "That if Comet's still alive, he might know something no one else does." "Exactly." 3 days later, they drove north to Helena. It was a long ride. Quiet roads, pine-covered hills, ghost towns swallowed by time and rust. They stopped at an old outpost station where Taylor had reportedly filed his last report. The ranger behind the counter looked about 70 and didn't bother hiding his suspicion. "What exactly are y'all looking for?" Emily flashed her federal ID, confirmation. He glanced at Lucas. "The kid too." Emily smiled, especially the kid. The man led them to the back office where a row of steel filing cabinets sat beneath a cracked map of the mountain range. "This is all we got left from the paper days," he said. "Most of it's digital now, but some records never made the jump." Lucas rifled through the drawers. Fifth one down in a folder marked Field Notes Ward, he found it. A photograph, old and faded, paper clipped to a hand-drawn topographic map. It showed Taylor crouching next to a stream. Behind him, the same shepherd Comet stood on a ridgetail, raised ears alert. In the corner of the photo, scribbled in ink, Comet 3 days before it all changed. Lucas held the photo for a long time, then asked where was this taken. The ranger tapped the map. "Old Miners Trail, West Ridge. Nobody goes up there anymore. Rock slides took most of it out." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Is it passable?" The man gave a shrug. "Only if you're stubborn." She smiled and looked at Lucas. "He's very stubborn." They hiked out the next morning. It was colder in the Helena Woods' crisper air, taller trees and a wind that cut straight through fleece. Shadow moved slow at first, but once they reached the ridge, he picked up pace. The terrain was rough, fallen rocks, exposed roots. But after 2 hours, they found the spot from the photo, same twisted pines, same view of the creek below. And carved into the trunk of the tallest pine, T+C, Lucas crouched, running his fingers over the grooves. Taylor and Comet. Emily scanned the area. If Taylor made it back here before he disappeared, he was trying to tell someone something. Maybe he thought Comet would bring help. Lucas stood and looked around. Or maybe this was where they separated. Shadow sniffed the ground nearby, then let out a low, uncertain bark. Lucas followed him, and that's when they saw it. A piece of torn harness caught on a jagged rock. Faded green nylon, barely there. But unmistakably part of a K9 vest. Lucas carefully picked it up. Comet. Emily nodded slowly, or what's left of him. Lucas looked around, his chest tight. No grave, no collar, no remains. Shadow was sniffing more intensely now, pacing back and forth near a fallen log. Then he stopped. One paw lifted. A signal. Lucas stepped over. At the base of the log, partially buried in pine needles and mud, was a scratched metal dog tag. He picked it up, wiped the dirt. Comet, K Maniston, Ward Unit. Behind him, Emily stood still, quiet. Lucas pocketed the tag. They didn't find him because they didn't look, he said softly. Just like you. Emily put a hand on his shoulder. And then Shadow growled. Not low, not uncertain, but protective. Lucas froze. From across the ridge in the distance, someone moved. A silhouette, brief, then gone behind the trees. Emily reached for her radio. Don't move. Lucas grabbed Shadow's collar. Nothing came. No gunshot, no sound, no footfall. But they'd seen it. Someone else was on that ridge. Back in Helena, Emily filed a formal report with DHS. Lucas submitted the photo, the tag, and his written statement. But they both knew what would happen. Official silence. Classified responses. Shrugs. So they didn't wait. Instead, they went home and started connecting dots. At the center, Lucas tacked a new map onto the wall of the back office. He marked Helena, Timberline Pass, every location with abandoned dogs tied to government personnel. It wasn't long before he had 7 pins, then 12, then 16, each with a similar story. K9 units marked inactive, missing handlers, closed cases, disappearing files. They're not just burying people, Lucas muttered one night. They're burying dogs. Emily stared at the map. And dogs can't testify. Lucas looked down at Shadow, who stared back with eyes full of knowing. But they can remember, Lucas said. Shadow's tail thumped once, and Lucas knew. This was just beginning. It started with a knock on the door. Not loud, just a polite tap, 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 like someone didn't want to wake the house. Lucas sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. The clock read 3:14 a.m. His heart thudded. In Pine Bridge, nothing happened at 3 a.m. unless something was wrong. He climbed out of bed, padded to the window, and peeked through the curtain. No one there. But something sat on the welcome mat. A plain manila envelope, no name, no stamp. Lucas slipped outside, barefoot, Shadow shadowing his every move. The dog sniffed the air, tense but quiet. Lucas knelt, picked up the envelope, and looked around. Still no one. Just the wind. He carried it back inside, flipped on the desk lamp, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a rusted, overgrown kennel building, half collapsed, the letters RA Field Unit 12, spray painted faintly on the crumbling cinder block wall. On the back of the photo, in shaky handwriting, Unit 12 never shut down, 38 to 57, 43, 3N, 1040, 44, 19, 2W, asked for ghost. Lucas stared. He didn't know who had left it, but he knew one thing, it wasn't a prank. At 7 a.m., Emily read the note over her second cup of coffee. By 7:05, she was loading maps into the Jeep. That's El Paso County, she said, glancing at the coordinates. East of Colorado Springs, high-altitude plateau. Quiet, isolated. Lucas looked at the back of the photo again. What's Unit 12? Emily's mouth twitched. Old name for a rural K9 training facility. I heard whispers about it years ago. Shut down in 2016, or so they said. Lucas looked at her. You think this is where the other dogs were taken? I think whoever sent that message wants us to find out. Shadow stood by the door, tail still, ears forward. Lucas zipped up his hoodie. Then let's go. They drove straight through the Rockies. Pine trees gave way to red stone mesas and open skies. By late afternoon, they crossed into Colorado, and Lucas spotted something strange. No cell service, no GPS, just static on the radio and miles of nothing. They reached the coordinates by sunset. It was exactly as the photo showed, a rundown facility surrounded by sagging fences and tall grass. The gate hung open. Faded Department of Agriculture signs were barely legible on the main building. Emily parked the Jeep. Lucas looked at the photo again. "Ask for Ghost." "Could be a call sign," Emily said, "or a code name." Lucas grabbed his backpack and flashlight. Shadow jumped out of the Jeep beside him, alert. They walked through the gate together. The facility was silent. No birds, no insects. Just wind pushing against the bent aluminum panels on the roof. Inside, the air smelled like rust and forgotten years. Empty cages lined the back walls, some chewed, others twisted at the hinges. Old feeding bowls still sat beneath them. Lucas shivered. "I don't think this place was ever decommissioned," he muttered. Emily nodded. "Feels like they just left." They turned a corner into what looked like an office area. Dusty filing cabinets, a rusted desk, and in the corner an old corkboard with a dozen clipped photos. Lucas moved closer. Each photo was of a dog. All different breeds, labs, Malinois shepherds, but all wearing canine harnesses. None were labeled, except one. At the bottom, written in red ink, Ghost. It was a white German shepherd with one blue eye and one brown. Scars ran down the left side of his face, and Lucas had seen him before. He just didn't realize it. "Wait," Lucas said. "I've seen this dog." In one of the letters from New Mexico, a woman said her brother used to train a white shepherd named Ghost before he went missing. She thought she was imagining things when she saw a dog just like it pacing a fence at a closed facility. Emily's eyebrows furrowed. "So Ghost isn't a code name? He's a survivor." Lucas nodded, and maybe the only one left. They searched the office until Lucas found an old file cabinet half hidden behind a tipped-over chair. He tugged it open. Inside were rows of documents, handler records, mission logs, and one file stamped inactive, missing. Emily grabbed it. "Taylor Ward," she said. "He's in here." They scanned the page. The final report claimed Taylor had gone AWOL, that Comet was reassigned. But the dates didn't line up. Comet was reported injured and returned to the site 3 nights in a row, Lucas whispered. But they said he was reassigned 2 weeks earlier. That's not possible. Emily clenched her jaw. They wrote the report after he vanished, then backdated it. Lucas's stomach turned. Shadow sniffed the ground nearby, then growled softly. Emily drew her flashlight and turned toward the hallway. At the end, a figure stood, still, silent. Then it stepped forward. A dog. White fur, blue and brown eyes. Ghost. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared at them. Shadow took a cautious step forward. Lucas held his breath. The 2 dogs stood nose to nose. Then Ghost huffed once low and slow. Emily whispered, "He's trying to lead us." Ghost turned and patted down the hallway. They followed. Through the back of the facility, past broken doors and empty rooms, into what looked like an old storage shed behind the main kennel. Ghost scratched once at the door, then sat down. Lucas opened it. Inside were 6 crates, each one labeled with a dog's name, unit number, and last known location. Each one empty. Lucas read the names aloud. Rexa, Sierra, Bravo, Comet, Nero, Luna. Ghost paced nervously. Lucas turned to Emily. These dogs weren't transferred. They were collected. Emily scanned the names, and hidden, there was one more item in the corner. An old camcorder covered in dust. Lucas picked it up. "Battery's dead." Emily took it. "Let's get back to town. We'll charge it and see what they left behind." Ghost followed them silently out of the building. As they crossed the threshold, a single sound cracked through the quiet. A gunshot. Emily spun around. Another shot hit the Jeep. Lucas dove behind a crate, grabbing Shadow's collar. Ghost growled, lips pulled back in a snarl. A figure darted through the trees. Emily fired back, warning only. "Get in the shed," she shouted. They all squeezed into the narrow space, slamming the door behind them. Lucas's chest heaved. "Someone doesn't want us leaving," he gasped. Emily pulled out her phone. Still no signal. She looked at the camera. If they wanted to silence us, they waited too long. Ghost sat by the door, watching, guarding. Lucas looked at him, then at Shadow. "Guess we found Ghost," he said quietly. Shadow thumped his tail once. Outside footsteps crunched in the gravel. Then silence. Emily looked at Lucas. "We wait till dawn, then we run." They got out at sunrise. Ghost led them down a game trail to a nearby ranger post, abandoned, but with a working radio. They called for help. By noon, 2 unmarked black SUVs arrived. But Emily had already hidden the camcorder and copies of the dog unit files under the ranger cabin floorboards. The agents questioned them, took statements, then drove off without explanation. Lucas and Emily didn't trust it. Not this time. Back in Pine Bridge, Lucas played the camcorder tape on a borrowed VCR. It showed training footage, handlers, dogs' field drills. Then, a date August 14, 2019. The video glitched. New footage. A hidden room. A man's voice off camera test phase ready. Comet's response exceeds baseline. Next phase suppression protocol. Then barking. High-pitched, painful. The screen went black. Lucas looked at Emily. They were experimenting on them. She nodded. Weaponizing memory, erasing commands, behavioral control. Lucas stood slowly. This is bigger than Reynolds. Emily didn't disagree. She just picked up the camcorder and said then we'd better be ready for what comes next. The snow had started falling again in Pinebridge. Not the heavy kind that silenced the town, but a slow drift of flakes that caught in the trees like whispers. Inside the Carter Reynolds Rescue Center, the lights were dimmed and the air smelled like cedar paper and strong coffee. Lucas stood at the back of the office with Emily staring at a wall of maps. Strings and pins, each one representing a different dog, a different case, a different secret. Next to him, Shadow lay on his side, one paw lazily draped over Ghosts. The two German shepherds had become inseparable in the weeks since Colorado, like they understood each other in ways no one else could. Lucas reached into the file cabinet and pulled out a new folder labeled in his handwriting. Archive 12 unsealed. Inside were the documents they'd found under the ranger cabin, a flash drive hidden in the camcorder's battery compartment, and a printed list of names from a digital file marked non-returned canine assets. 36 names, 36 dogs. Emily sat behind the desk, her brow furrowed as she typed notes into a locked laptop. We're running out of time, she said. Someone's cleaning house. We've already lost access to the drive's metadata. Lucas nodded. We still have the video. They'd watched it again that morning. The same glitchy footage, the same voice talking about suppression protocols, the same flash of Comet being dragged out of frame by handlers in gray uniforms. And the worst part, the video was timestamped 2 weeks after Taylor Ward was reported dead. That's our proof, Lucas said. They knew he was still alive, and they hid it. Emily closed the laptop. We need to go public. Lucas looked down at the table, at the names, the scars. They won't just let us, he said. She nodded. That's why we're not asking. The next day, they drove to a secure satellite office in Billings, leased under an animal therapy nonprofit, but quietly managed by a former DOJ whistleblower named Jonah Wells. He owed Emily a favor. Lucas handed Jonah the flash drive. There's enough in here to expose every part of the program. Dog experiments, disappeared handlers, fabricated death certificates. Jonah blinked. You want me to run this? Emily nodded. I want you to release it. Jonah leaned back in his chair. You sure once this goes out, there's no walking it back? People will come knocking. Lucas met his gaze. Let them. We have nothing to hide. They do. Jonah hesitated. Then he plugged in the drive. The story hit the internet within 48 hours. Posted to public archives, mirrored across anonymous accounts picked up by small-town papers. First then animal rights groups, then national news. Leaked documents reveal secret federal K9 program. Former agents speak out, we were told to erase them. Teen who uncovered agent's burial exposes second government scandal. The headlines were everywhere. By the end of the week, 3 congressional aides had resigned. By the end of the month, a new federal inquiry had been announced. But for Lucas, it wasn't about justice anymore. It was about memory. 2 weeks later, they returned to Timberline Pass. The same trail, same ridge. Lucas walked the path with Ghost beside him, in Shadow just a few steps behind. At the edge of the forest, he stopped. There, freshly planted, was a bronze plaque. In memory of Comet, K9 or R261, rescued what others tried to erase. Lucas crouched down and ran his fingers across the letters. Ghost sat beside him silent. Emily stepped forward and placed a collar green nylon stitched with Comet's name at the base of the plaque. No more secrets, she whispered. And for the first time in months, it felt real. Final. Frictination. Back in Pinebridge, things settled again. Not because the world had fixed itself, but because Lucas had done what he set out to do. He told the truth. He didn't run. And in doing so, he gave a voice to every handler, every K9, every silenced name buried behind classified folders. The center had doubled in size by spring. 2 new wings were added, one for legacy training, the other for handler counseling. Emily stayed on as director. Lucas, still a teenager, had become the heart of it all. Not a badge wearer, but a listener, a protector, a boy who didn't walk away. One quiet Sunday evening after the last training session had ended, Lucas sat outside the center on the back steps. Ghost dozed on one side of him, Shadow on the other. The wind stirred the pine needles. The sky glowed in soft shades of orange and pink. Emily stepped out holding 2 root beers and handed one to Lucas. "They offered you an award," she said. "Congressional Honor of Civic Valor, ceremonies next month." Lucas shrugged. "What do I even wear to something like that?" She laughed. "Doesn't matter. You've already done more than most adults with fancy medals ever will." Lucas looked out at the field where 2 kids were playing fetch with a retired Labrador named Juno. Then he asked, "Do you think they'll remember?" Emily tilted her head. "Who?" "The dogs, the ones they tried to erase." She nodded. "I think dogs never forget the people who stayed." Lucas smiled, then said, "I just hope the world remembers them too." As night fell, Lucas walked the grounds one last time. He passed the Wall of Honor, where each photo of a recovered or rescued K9 hung with a simple brass plate. At the end of the row, a new picture had been added. Ghost, still and solemn, one ear cocked slightly forward. Beneath it, the ghost who refused to disappear. Lucas stared at it for a while. Then he whispered, "We found you, and we didn't stop." Shadow padded beside him. Lucas reached down, scratched behind his ears, and whispered, "Because you never stopped either." Thank you so much for following Lucas and Shadow's journey. This story wasn't just about a boy and a dog. It was about what happens when people pay attention, when they listen to the voiceless, and when they refuse to look away. Now it's your turn. What would you do if you discovered a hidden truth, one no one else wanted to see? Would you stay silent, or would you follow the trail? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the bond between humans and animals, and the power of one voice to make a difference, consider subscribing to Heroes for Animals for more true inspiring stories like this one. From all of us in Pinebridge, thank you for listening.